The agenda this week explored the civic significance of jury duty. We considered the value of teaching kids how to code and sat down with a music industry trailblazer. The agenda's week in review begins with the stunning election this week of Donald J. Trump as the 45th President of the United States. Just before we begin our conversation, and remind everybody of what transpired last night. Yes, Donald Trump did carry more than 270 electoral votes, which he was required to win the presidency. In terms of the popular vote, however, she got more votes than him. Not many more, only 200,000 votes separating the two of them from coast to coast. But the Electoral College, of course, is where it matters most. In those key battleground states, Trump took Florida, barely. Trump took Pennsylvania, barely. Trump took Ohio by a very good-sized margin. Trump took North Carolina by a good-sized margin. And one of the great shocks of the evening, Trump took Michigan. Again, just barely. The United States now finds itself with a Republican president, a Republican Senate, and a Republican House of Representatives. And with that, let's go around the horn and find out what America said last night. Scotty, get us started.
Well, thanks for having me, Steve. What the United States said last night is we want something completely different. We don't care how the table's set. We want somebody to go in there and flip the table, as my colleague Newt Gingrich said. And what I'm not sure Canadians really had an appreciation for until today is Americans are worried. There are whole blocks of voters that are worried about the Supreme Court, that are worried about the premiums they pay for Obamacare. And so there's an economic anxiety or religious fundamentalism combined with a desire to do something completely different, and boy, did they elect somebody totally new.
Henry, what did Americans say last night?
Well, I think Americans said a lot what Scotty just said, but fundamentally what unites Trump voters is the idea that they've been left behind and left out and ignored in the promise of American life over the last 15 to 20 years. Some of it's economic, some of it's cultural, but they feel like the people who run the country don't care about them and don't want to see them be part of the conversation of the future America. And what they were telling America and the American elite is, we're Americans too, get us back in the game and have us at the table. And they just put the biggest guy in the country at the table as their advocate.
Heather, what would you add to that?
Americans don't like third terms. So Clinton running for an Obama third term faced an uphill challenge. And the other thing that maybe is not what we've heard is that Trump actually did very well in upper income groups. So this isn't so much, whereas Clinton won the lowest income voters. So this isn't so much people who are truly the most suffering in our society pushing back. It is people who perceive themselves to be maybe getting less opportunity than they did in the past.
Georgianne, before asking you, I guess we should establish that even though you work for Stephen Harper and the Conservative Party, you're also a joint citizen, so you cast a vote yesterday. How did you vote?
I voted for Donald Trump.
Where?
I voted in Florida, actually, and it wasn't yesterday. I voted a few weeks ago by absentee ballot. But I was in Virginia for the last week working on the campaign.
And I guess, obvious question, why Mr. Trump?
Well, I think the one thing that I really haven't heard is that a lot of Americans, are tired of the political class, the donors, the lobbyists, the career politicians, and they really wanted someone who was not of that ilk. And it's interesting that they picked a billionaire, but he is beginning to be known as the blue-collar billionaire. He's a guy who identifies more strongly personally with blue-collar people, with working people, with taxi drivers, with the guys that work on his construction sites, than he does with the rich elite in New York City where he lives. So I think it's very interesting that Americans have elected someone, despite his wealth, who they identify with very strongly and who is not of the political class.
Akwasi, what did Americans say last night?
I think in a nutshell, Americans said yes to divisive politics and to a message of hate. That's
not pulling your punches at all. Everybody's trying to be very ecumenical this morning. including the president, who said he had a very nice conversation with Mr. Trump. How come you're not feeling the ecumenical spirit today?
Well, I think it was quite obvious in how he started his campaign. Right off the bat, there was talk of Mexicans, talk of Muslims. It didn't take him long to get into other segments, including Black Americans. And this was very clear. This was very explicit during his campaign. And for me as a sociologist and as a criminologist, this is something that came through very clearly in listening to Trump's messaging.
I don't think that people elected Donald Trump because of the racism. I think they elected him in spite of it. I do think it exposed a very difficult, sort of our worst angels, if you will. That's kind of how he got through the primary process. But that having been said, I think people were willing to set that aside only because they wanted something so completely different and something so completely new that they were willing to even elect him, even if they disagreed with his rhetoric. I understand why people are really upset about it all over the world, but I also understand why people were frustrated with the institutions, with the many years of control of one party, and they really wanted something new, and they let their voices be heard. That having been said, though, Steve, Barack Obama, as you pointed, well, you didn't point out, but I'll point out, got more votes than Donald Trump. Mitt Romney got more votes than Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton got more votes than Donald Trump. So it's part of the peculiarity, I guess, of our system that most people actually didn't vote. But the way the Electoral College works, Donald Trump won. And not only did he win, but he's got a Republican House and a Republican Senate. So he's got a lot to do. And I think it's important for people to put the divisiveness of the campaign behind us and come together and try to help him succeed. The stakes are really high, and it's important that everybody try to do that.
We should point out you say that in spite of the fact that I know this day after, your heart is broken. You were a big Hillary supporter. You came on this program and talked about it not too long ago. How easy is it going to be for people to do what you just said they need to do?
It's hard, but it's important. You know, who was it that said democracy is the worst form of politics and government in the world, except for all the alternatives?
Churchill.
Churchill, that's right. So we have to respect what people have said. We also have to respect each other. You know, if Hillary Clinton had won yesterday, the Donald Trump people would be disheartened and heartbroken, and they would have had to accept the results just as the Hillary Clinton supporters have to accept the results. So it's just part of the way we go, and people have to fight for what they believe in, and then they have to come together and try to run the place. So it's hard, but it's not impossible. It's politics.
Having said that, Henry, if you were in America today, a Muslim American, an African American, a Mexican American, how would you feel about your current circumstances?
Well, I mean, certainly there were people in all those groups who were strongly supportive of Donald Trump, but I understand you're asking if you were a majority, person who held the majority opinion in those groups, how would I feel? I would feel disappointed, I would feel upset, and I would feel wary. I would want to hear more of what Donald Trump was saying last night when he gave his victory speech, and he talked in a much softer tone than he used throughout most of the campaign. He talked about bringing Americans together, of being the president for all Americans from all races and all backgrounds. The question is, will the deeds match the words? Is the Donald Trump we heard last night going to be President Trump and the other person was candidate Trump? Or is he going to revert to the type that in fact divided rather than united? He should not lose sight of the fact that, first of all, he's going to lose the popular vote once all the votes are counted from California by about 1 million votes. It'll be the largest popular vote deficit that any president will have accepted office in. Secondly, he will have been elected with the worst public opinion ratings. This is not an endorsement of Donald Trump per se, as it is an endorsement of change and a desire to have a voice at the table, and he needs to understand that if he's going to govern effectively.
Are employers required to pay the salaries of employees who are called to jury duty?
No, they're not. So the Juries Act says that you're not allowed to fire someone for serving on a jury, but that you don't have to pay them either. And so I am concerned about this, even in short trials. I think this provides a reason for many people to say, I just can't do this, right? That first 10 days, you're not paid anything. Even some of these longer trials, this is not a meaningful income supplement. And so if we are interested in having juries that represent the diversity of our society, we have to think about the impact of asking people to forego income for 10 days or to get by on a very modest stipend.
Let me flip over to the other side of the coin. Let's say you are prepared to do your civic duty, you're prepared to do jury duty, but you're going to have to spend, I don't know, $100 a day or $50 a day hiring a babysitter to take care of your kids or pick them up from school. Would that be covered?
Well, so again, this is currently, we don't provide these kinds of supports, but in 2011, there was actually an important study that came out. Former Supreme Court of Canada Justice Frank Iacobucci reported on representation on First Nations juries in Ontario, and he identified some serious deficiencies in terms of Indigenous representation on juries in the province.
Hold that thought. I got this right here. We got a graphic on this. Katie O'Connor, our producer, thinks of everything here. Should we bring this up? Here's Frank Iacobucci, who did this study on how First Nations people are represented on juries, and here's what he found. The report highlighted that in the Judicial District of Kenora, Northwest Ontario, makes up a third of the province's landmass. 30 to 36% of the population live on reserve. These people only make up 10% of the Kenora jury roll. In the Thunder Bay District, people living on a reserve make up to 5% of the population, but only account for 1.3% of the jury roll. All right, what does that tell us?
So what this tells us is that there are serious representation problems when it comes to Indigenous people on juries. And one of Justice Iacobucci's recommendations was actually that we look at expanding the supports that we provide in terms of childcare, elder care, to free people up so that they can serve on juries. But certainly in Northern Ontario, there are some very serious deficiencies in terms of the extent to which Indigenous people are getting onto jury rolls and then ultimately onto juries.
Can you, Judge Spire, just help us understand what the consequences are of a jury pool that is not representative of the greater population?
Well, my experience has been in the Toronto area and in the area of Brampton, Milton, and Halton. And so I think that it is fairly representative. I don't have the experience in Northern Ontario that Justice Iacobucci was talking about. It is a problem, I agree, but I only know it anecdotally.
It's a problem because why?
Because you would like to have a representative population on your juries. It's as simple as that.
Because what would that give you that you'd be concerned
that people are
there?
Included. The feeling, the civic feeling that everybody is included.
Does it have an impact on a defendant's right to a fair trial if, you know, the makeup of the jury is not representative of the population as a whole?
I think certainly. I mean, we can't have a perfectly representative jury, but I think that, you know, the whole idea of a jury of one's peers, right, means that you have 12 people bringing their unique perspectives. They come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different racial backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, and they all come together and they go into that room in secret and they look at the evidence and they hopefully come out with a fair result. And I think that, you know, if we have all people who are all the same, it really impacts that procedure. But I would say, Steve, and I think Justice Spire would agree with me, that the jurors they usually get it right, even in our current system. You know, it may not be perfect, it may not be diverse enough. There are all these challenges. But I think that by and large, not all the time, but by and large, jurors, they take their job really seriously. They show up on time. They often come wearing suits, people who wouldn't necessarily wear a suit to work, but you see them, they're in suits, they're taking notes.
Shows how seriously they take the process.
They take it so seriously, and they usually get it right.
You know, my ears prick up when I hear the word usually, because that, of course, means they don't always get it right. And if I'm the defendant, and I'm one of the times when they don't get it right, that's problematic, isn't it?
Sure, but you know, no offense meant to Justice Spire, but judges don't always get it right either.
Right. Or journalists, I hear. That's another story.
Can I just intervene on that? I think Indira has hit a key point, and that is how good juries are. And you know, it's been my experience, at least, that almost inevitably, I think verdicts are justifiable. There are some miscarriages of justice, and we have to address those. But nevertheless, the jury system has really served us well. It's the bulwark of our democracy.
I would just intervene here to say that one dynamic that we really need to pay attention to when we're talking about Indigenous representation on juries in particular is not only do we have Indigenous people underrepresented on juries, but they're overrepresented dramatically as accused people. And so there is an important dynamic here where when juries are not representative, there's a sense very much that the group of people doing the judging and the group of people being criminalized are not the same groups. And so I have a lot of respect for the institution of the jury, but I'm very concerned about these representativeness issues that have been identified. And I think we find often, not just in the context of Indigenous people, but the people who are sometimes excluded from juries are people who are marginalized. They're the people who can't forego 10 days income. They're people that maybe the Crown perceives is more likely to be friendly to a racialized accused. So there is a dynamic here that I think we have to be attentive to.
There's a documented gender imbalance in the STEM fields in Canada, and according to an article in Maclean's magazine, this to me just blows my mind. In 1987, 20% of the STEM workforce was women. Today, it's it's only at a whopping 22%. And tech companies like Facebook, Twitter have all been criticized for not hiring enough women or racialized people. So can the introduction of coding in elementary schools help to combat this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of issues at play, and so I don't want to simplify the problem because I think there's definitely a retention and a lot of stuff that workforces can do. But if you're thinking about kind of the funnel, if we can engage and keep more women and girls engaged at a young age, so that when they enter university, they pursue computer science, they pursue jobs in computer science. Like I think that will go a long way, and that's the work that we're trying to do. I think once they get into the workforce, there's still also a lot to keep them there, and there's a lot of recent articles about that and kind of the environment that exists in tech companies, but I think it's really about exposing them and getting them excited and keeping them excited and giving them the opportunities to keep learning and to kind of combat that stereotype that girls, it's not cool to be good at math or science and that computers are this big daunting thing when really they're accessible. It's easy to get started and to pick it up, and so I think the school system has a huge role to play to introduce this to everyone, especially girls.
And you know what? I will agree there. It's a long equation with multiple variables. And I think it's education, it's attitude. I think there's curiosity involved no matter how you slice it. I remember the day, my father came home and he dropped a Texas Instrument computer in front of me. And there was a book and he was like, go nuts. And I remember sitting there like, what am I supposed to do? And then, I put it together. We had back then there weren't really monitors. It was like a TV, and I put that together. And a few months later, I made it sing happy birthday to my mom, But I also think on the educational side, think of the days where a guidance counselor may have told you, you know what, don't go into this area because I think your strengths lie here. And they may have been nice to you in letting you know, like, hey, what you think, what they believe you might be best at. But again, we were talking about the discovery element. Why not offer this discovery and see what happens, later on? And I think part of that is missing.
But you were lucky enough to have parents who had those resources.
Certainly. Absolutely.
So how important is it for parents to be involved for kids who don't have that?
Well, the parents need to also know what is out there, So if you have a parent who doesn't really understand computer science or computers, whatever benefits they may provide, they may not be the one bringing that computer home to their kids saying, hey, try this out here. I hear this is supposed to be cool, build something. And, that's also part of the challenge. So that's why I say there are many variables in this equation, and it's not just, yes, exposure is certainly one of them. And, we know that, good things happen thereafter, but it's much more, I think, complicated than that.
Michelle, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful with the gender piece. I think sometimes we do kind of a chocolate-covered broccoli maneuver where we take this thing that we think girls won't like and we try to dip it in something yummy. So we're like, oh, okay, so let's do coding with girls. Let's make it about fashion. Let's make it about this and that. And I think that can be problematic, and it really cements, it gives a weird one-sided view of what female gender looks like, in my opinion. And I think that the focus should really be on what problems can you solve with this? What can you do that's interesting with this? Here's a robot, what can you make it do? Sure. And I think a challenge that we're facing in Ontario schools right now with teaching coding and computational thinking is it's coding for coding's sake. You make something happen on a screen and it looks and feels sometimes like a video game. And I can see a lot of people, boys and girls, being kind of like, well, what's the point? So I think we have to, if this is something we think it's important and it's going to show up in the Ontario curriculum, hopefully soon, I think we have to expand it out to being something that helps us solve problems, something that is about those bigger thinking ideas that I talked about, debugging, persisting with difficult tasks, taking a big problem and cutting it down. And also, it's something that should be social as well. I don't want to see my kids, each of them alone on an iPad or Chromebook or any device, pressing buttons, kind of like separated from their peers. And particularly for girls who tend to be more social, that can be a huge turnoff because they want to do, often girls prefer to do things socially. So I think we just have to watch oh, well, girls aren't interested, let's make it pink, which then is going to have some counter problems down the road.
So it's been said that anyone can learn how to code. So is coding the great equalizer?
I mean, I think it can be if we can give everyone access, right? I think that's an interesting thing, and the reason why we're advocating for this to be in the school system is, right now our experience running programs extracurricularly is that parents who know about this, who have the means and resources to bring their kids to our programs, are the ones that are learning to code. You think of stories, and Toby, who, the CEO of Shopify, gave this same story at an event recently, which is he just stumbled on it. He was fortunate enough to just find this, right? That shouldn't be how our kids find out about technology, right? Like, we should give them these opportunities. It does transcend borders. You can learn this anywhere. I mean, the resources that you need to get started are pretty minimal, but it's only if we can give access to everybody that we're going to be able to see the benefits and get everyone involved in building.
We have about 30 seconds, Henri. Last word.
I definitely, I'm a big proponent of discovery. And I've been sort of very curious about this rush to code and what people, see in it. But for the most part, I want to see people kind of, be very successful. There's so much, we were saying outside the 80-20 rule, 20% of development is like creating, the other 80 is actually debugging. So, there are days where it's just not fun, but hopefully, it could be like the bigger picture is like, let's get people really into STEM, ultimately.
Now, we met at Much Music City TV.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, and it was celebrated back then and even now for diversity, both on air and behind the scene. And that was over 30 years ago. And now diversity seems to be the word of the day. Why has it taken so long for others to understand its importance?
Well, it's key, I think. It's key to who we are as humans on this planet. Back in the day, and there still is, when TV broadcasters get their licenses, they adhere or they espouse diversity, that they'll be reflective. But it's not putting diversity on camera, behind the camera, trying to get some gender equality in there. It's not only the right thing to do, it makes great business sense. Not only at City TV, where Moses and Ron Waters and Sarah Crawford and ultimately me, we were all about making sure that we were looking like the community that we served, right? And Toronto being, the most multicultural city in the country, it's really important that people see themselves reflected on the air. At CBC, the same thing. Metro Morning has been #1 for 84 books, I think. And it's because they put all of their programming through this diversity lens. So it's better programming at the end of the day. It makes better business sense because you can increase your audiences. And, if you're looking to do the right thing, happy multicultural diversity won't just happen because we wish it. We have to make it happen, and we have to work towards inclusivity.
And one thing I didn't know was that in some places it's mandated, but when you look at the screens, you might not realize that it's part of their license.
Right. Well, it's tough for some people to, push that rock up a hill, and sometimes you have to put quotas around it, or sometimes you can do it because it's the right thing to do, and City TV did that.
Now, you never expected to be on air.
No.
You were self-conscious about your lisp and your height.
When I'm on TV.
And it's bizarre because you encouraged me to be on air, and I was very self-conscious about my stutter. Why is mentoring women important to you?
Oh, it's really important, you know, because, I mean, mentoring everybody, but women in particular, because at the time, you know, the entertainment business, the broadcast, it was a very male-dominated world. And people need a leg up. I mean, it wasn't, I mean, even with you now, I mean, you did not want to go do that demo, and you certainly didn't want to do it again.
3 times, and then the 3rd time you said, you don't say no to your boss.
Exactly.
And that's when I did the reel.
And look at you now.
I know, thank you.
So much. Well, you know, it's not even a thank you to me. Yeah. It's that, you know, you would not have been the success you are had you not had that already there. So you need people around you to just go, you know, give it a whirl, try it, you can do it.
In the book, you mentioned that you've never experienced overt sexism at work, but you also mentioned how hard women in leadership have to work. Doesn't these 2 things seem at odds?
You know, I don't think I was cognizant of it, to be honest. I mean, I was struggling so hard just to be accepted, to, you know, do good work, that I'm pretty sure that when misogyny reared its head, I kind of deflected it, right? And didn't, you know, acknowledge it. And plus, I was 6 feet tall, so that kind of helped. But at the end of the day, I mean, I remember in the music business, I was the president of Sony Music Canada. I was the only female president of a country in our company. So I would go to these big meetings, and there would be, you know, France and Germany and Latin America and everybody around the table, but the only woman. So people would say, well, were you leaning in? I was leaning so far across the table, my feet were off the ground. And then they'd say, well, weren't there any mentors? And sure, there were very powerful women in New York, but it's a competitive business. And asking those ladies to mentor me would have been like asking them to help me tie my shoes. It just wasn't done. So
what did you do?
So I just worked harder, you know, and you know, really struggled to figure out a new business, particularly a business under fire at the time.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety if you like. They're on our website, tvo.org, and on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.